Welcome back to the channel, where we bring you the most unbelievable stories that you won't want to miss. In today's video, we'll uncover a shocking situation that no one could have predicted. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, is attacked by a dangerous group of hackers. But what happens when Mark decides to fight back? Get ready, because the ending will leave you speechless. Mark Zuckerberg sat in his sleek, minimalistic office at Facebook's headquarters, a sprawling building in Menlo Park, California. The hum of the office was interrupted only by the occasional sound of fingers tapping on keyboards and the quiet murmur of employees brainstorming ideas for the next big feature. For Mark, it was just another typical day, a day filled with meetings, emails, and tech talk. But today, things were about to take a drastic turn. As he typed away on his laptop, the usual noise of the office faded into the background. He was so absorbed in his work, reading through a new proposal for Facebook's augmented reality features, that he didn't notice a small, almost imperceptible change on his screen. A pop-up appeared at the bottom right corner of his desktop, flashing a cryptic message: "You're being watched. Your time is up." Mark leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing at the message. He shrugged, dismissing it as just another prank from one of the engineers in the building. After all, he was used to seeing weird pop-ups from time to time, especially from the more mischievous team members who love to mess with the boss. But then, things started to escalate. The message didn't disappear. Instead, it flickered, and before he could react, his entire screen froze. Panic didn't set in yet, but a slight chill ran down his spine. He clicked the mouse, but nothing responded. His screen was entirely unresponsive. Then, as if mocking him, a new message appeared, this time, in bold letters. "We've infiltrated your system. You'll never see it coming." Mark froze. His first thought was, this has to be a joke, a sick prank, probably by someone in the security team. But wait, his mind raced. What if it wasn't a joke? What if it was real? He hit the keyboard in frustration, trying to open new windows, to restart the system, but everything was locked. His screen began to glitch, and for a moment, Mark felt like he was trapped in an episode of a cyber thriller. It was as though his entire life, his business, his legacy, his empire, was under attack, right in front of his eyes. "All right, enough of this. Time to end this little game," Mark muttered, a wry smile creeping onto his face. "Let's see how good these hackers really are." But as he reached for his phone to call in his top security team, something completely unexpected happened. His phone rang. It wasn't the call he was expecting. The name on the screen wasn't one he recognized. Hesitant, he answered, "Hello?" A deep, distorted voice came through the line. "You've made a big mistake. Zuckerberg, your time is up. Facebook is ours now." Mark's fingers tightened around the phone, but his voice remained calm. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled darkly. "The question isn't who we are. The question is, how long do you think you can hold us off?" Suddenly, the lights in Mark's office flickered. It was as if the building itself was being consumed by this mysterious force. Panic rose within him, but he didn't let it show. Not yet. Not in front of the person on the other end of the line. He immediately muted the call and opened up his emergency security software. But it was too late. Whoever these hackers were, they were already inside. "Hey, Mark, you all right in there?" A familiar voice came through the door. It was Evan, one of his senior developers. Mark hesitated for a moment, feeling a surge of frustration. "What's going on?" he thought. "I'm fine, Evan, but something's going on with the system. Can you check it out?" Evan, clearly unaware of the gravity of the situation, stepped into the office. "Sure, no problem." He leaned over Mark's desk, peering at the screen. "Oh, you've got a pop-up issue. Probably some sort of malware," Evan said with a chuckle. "I'll get the IT team to fix it in no time. Shouldn't be anything to worry about." But Mark wasn't so sure. He stood up, shaking his head. "Evan, this isn't a joke. This is bad. Something's off. It's not just a pop-up." Evan raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He started typing away. But suddenly, the same distorted voice from the phone rang out through Mark's computer speakers. We've infiltrated your system. Mark, we can see everything. Your secrets, your plans, your personal data. It's all ours now. Evan's eyes widened, his fingers frozen over the keyboard. What the hell? This is real, isn't it? Mark nodded grimly. Yes, and it's worse than we thought. Get the security team. Now. But before Evan could make a move, the office door swung open. It was one of Mark's top security experts, Sam. She looked panic-stricken, and when she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Mark, we've been hit. They've compromised every system. All the backup protocols are being overridden. We can't stop them. It's like they knew exactly how to bypass every defense we have. Mark's stomach dropped. He felt the weight of the situation crashing down on him. Facebook was under attack. But this wasn't just any hacker trying to steal data. This felt personal. Whoever was behind this knew too much. He ran his hand through his hair. Get everyone out of here. We need to isolate the servers and cut off all external connections. This is going to get worse before it gets better. On it, Sam said, already pulling out her phone and dialing the emergency hotline. As she turned to leave, Mark stood motionless, staring at the screen, feeling the pressure mounting with every passing second. A few minutes later, Mark found himself alone in the room again. The team was scrambling to contain the breach, but nothing was working. It was like the hackers were always one step ahead. As Mark paced back and forth, the screen in front of him flickered again. A new message appeared. You can't escape us. Facebook belongs to us now. Every second that ticks by, more of your data is ours. Mark gritted his teeth, his hands shaking slightly as he typed rapidly into the command line. This wasn't the first time his system had been targeted. He had dealt with cyber attacks before, but this felt different. It felt like the beginning of something far more dangerous. And just as the screen flashed a warning about an incoming breach from another angle, Mark's phone buzzed once again. It was an encrypted text message from an unknown number. He opened it without hesitation, hoping for some clue, some kind of way out. The text read, "We know everything about you, Mark, your secrets, your weaknesses, but you still have a chance to stop us. If you want to save Facebook and yourself, you'll have to act fast." Mark's mind raced as he processed the message. His heart was pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about data or Facebook anymore. It was about something much bigger. Someone wanted to take everything he had worked for, and they weren't going to stop until they had it all. At that moment, Mark made a decision. He wasn't going to be a passive victim. He wasn't going to wait for someone else to fix it. He was going to take control. This wasn't just his company, it was his life, his vision, and he would fight for it with everything he had. He sat down in front of his computer, fingers poised over the keys, ready to strike back at the hackers who thought they could defeat him. This ends now, Mark muttered to himself, and as he typed the final line of code, something changed. The lights in the office flickered one last time before they went dark. The hackers had just made their first mistake. Mark was about to show them why you don't mess with him. The silence in Mark's office was deafening. After typing the last line of code, Mark had hoped he'd finally gained the upper hand. He sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, waiting for the usual system confirmation that the attack had been neutralized. But as the seconds ticked by, the screen remained eerily still. No notifications, no green check marks, no comforting words telling him he had won. Then, the lights flickered again. It wasn't a simple glitch this time. It was a pulse. Like the building itself was alive, breathing in sync with the threat that loomed over them all. Mark's stomach twisted into knots. He had done everything he could, hadn't he? His phone buzzed once again, and his heart skipped a beat. A new message popped up on his screen. This time, it wasn't from an unknown number. The message read, "Your PL?" Mark's fingers hovered over the keyboard. But before he could type a response, another message appeared. Almost immediately, "You thought you could stop us with some lines of code? You're not dealing with amateurs." His blood ran cold. He had underestimated the threat. Whoever these hackers were, they weren't just a couple of bored techies trying to make a name for themselves. They were organized, dangerous, and had somehow known exactly what buttons to press. He quickly tapped his intercom. "Sam, I need a status update now. A few seconds passed before her voice crackled through the speaker. Mark, it's worse than we thought. The system's still compromised. They've bypassed every layer of security we've set up. And it's not just Facebook anymore. They've somehow gained access to every connected platform. Mark's heart sank. Every platform? The thought of these hackers having access to the entirety of his digital empire, everything from WhatsApp to Instagram, was terrifying. What if they could do more than just steal data? What if they had plans to completely dismantle everything he had built? Get the team on this. Find out exactly how deep they've infiltrated. I want everything shut down until we know for sure, Mark ordered. Before Sam could respond, the phone line clicked, and the distorted voice from before cut through the silence like a knife. You're wasting your time. Zuckerberg, the voice sneered. We've already taken everything we need, and we have much more in store for you. Mark's knuckles whitened as his grip on the desk tightened. He had spent years building Facebook into a global force, and now, someone was threatening to destroy it all. This wasn't just a simple hack. No, this was personal. Who are you? Mark demanded. What do you want? The voice chuckled. Who we are is irrelevant. What matters is what we'll do next. You see, Mark, you've built something beautiful here. A platform that connects billions of people. But now, we're going to tear it down, piece by piece. And there's nothing you can do to stop us. Mark's mind raced as the hacker's words sank in. You're wrong, Mark said firmly. You might have the technical skills, but you don't understand what you're dealing with. This company isn't just a bunch of servers and code. It's people. You can't take it down that easily. There was a pause on the other end, a brief silence before the hacker spoke again, this time with a mocking tone. Is that so? Well, let me show you just how wrong you are. Suddenly, Mark's screen flickered, and the room's lights dimmed once again. Mark cursed under his breath, his fingers moving frantically to access the internal system, trying to regain control. But nothing worked. The system was frozen, as if the hackers had locked him out. What are you doing? Mark growled, frustration boiling in his chest. A new message appeared on the screen. We're just getting started. The countdown has begun. Mark's eyes widened. A countdown? His thoughts raced, trying to process what this meant. What was the hacker's endgame? Was this just about money? Or was there something deeper going on? Then, without warning, the screen began to display numbers. A countdown. 10, 9, 8. Mark's pulse quickened. The clock was ticking, and he didn't know what the hackers were planning. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just about breaching Facebook security. This was a carefully orchestrated attack, and every second mattered. He glanced at the door as Sam hurried into the room, her face pale. Mark, we've got a serious problem. It's not just the systems. They've started hacking into physical infrastructure too. Security cameras are offline. Our alarm systems are going haywire. It's like they have control of everything. Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. I need to know everything. Now. Sam handed him a tablet, and Mark scanned the live security feed. Sure enough, the building's security systems were compromised. The cameras were offline, and he could see employees in the hallway running around in confusion. Sam, this is bigger than we thought. They're not just after data. They're after everything. Mark, what are we going to do? Sam asked, her voice trembling. Mark clenched his jaw, steeling himself for what was to come. We're going to take the fight to them. Hours later, the tension in the Facebook headquarters was palpable. Every employee had been told to evacuate, and the building was now in lockdown. Mark had rallied his top security team and was working with them to trace the hacker's location. Despite the pressure, Mark remained calm. He was no stranger to stress. He'd built one of the largest companies in the world. After all, but this felt different. It wasn't just his company at stake. It was the entire digital infrastructure of the modern world. Mark sat in a dimly lit room, watching as his team worked feverishly to trace the hacker's signal. The countdown on his screen had now reached 3, 2, 1. And then, nothing. The countdown stopped. Wait, what happened? Sam asked, eyes wide. The screen in front of Mark flickered one last time, and then the hacker's voice came through, cold and menacing. Congratulations, Mark, the voice said. You've bought yourself some time, but it won't last long. We're everywhere now, and soon, the world will know. Facebook was never yours. It belongs to us. Mark's heart dropped. The threat was clear now. These hackers weren't just after money. They wanted to make a statement, and it seemed like they had already won. But Mark wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. We'll see about that, he muttered under his breath. He turned to Sam, who was staring at the screen in disbelief. Get me everything we have on them. This is far from over. Sam nodded, determination flooding her features. You got it. As the hacker's laughter echoed through the room, Mark knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. The war for control over the digital world was only starting, and he wasn't going to let these mysterious attackers win. Not without a fight. This wasn't just about data anymore. This was about survival. The phone call ended, and Mark was left alone in the darkened room, staring at the flashing screens in front of him. The hacker's message had rattled him, but it wasn't the first time Mark had been faced with an obstacle. No, this was something bigger. This was personal. He pushed away from the desk and stood up, pacing around the room. The weight of the situation pressed on him. Facebook was under attack. And this time, it wasn't just the system that was in danger. It was everything he'd built over the years. His empire, his legacy. As his mind raced, a sense of clarity settled in. He needed to act. Now, his fingers dialed a number on his phone, and after a few moments, the familiar voice of his trusted advisor, James, crackled through the speaker. Mark, I'm here. What's the situation? James asked, his voice calm but tinged with concern. The hackers have breached everything, Mark replied, his voice steady but with a cold edge. They've gained control of more than just our internal systems. They've infiltrated physical infrastructure, security cameras, alarms, everything. It's a full-scale attack. James let out a low whistle. That's insane. So, what are we going to do about it? Mark gritted his teeth. I'm going to fight back. I need you to gather the best cybersecurity team we have. We're not just going to wait for them to finish us off. We're going to take the fight to them. There was a moment of silence before James responded. You're sure about this, right? This is going to get ugly. Mark paused. He knew James was right. A fight like this could mean war, but he couldn't back down. He had never backed down from a challenge in his life. Yeah, I'm sure, Mark said, his voice full of resolve. Get everyone on board. I'll be at the headquarters in an hour. James hesitated for a moment before responding. All right, I'll get the team ready. We'll be waiting for you. Mark ended the call and walked over to his desk, his mind already calculating his next steps. He had been in the tech world long enough to know that when it came to hackers, the key to victory wasn't just about having better software. It was about being faster, smarter, and more ruthless. As he looked at his phone, Mark made another call, this time to his personal security detail. I need to get to the headquarters. Now. The response came quickly. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Sir, are you sure you want to go in alone? Mark's lips curled into a faint smile. I've got a team waiting for me. I need to get there. And I need to get there fast. 1 hour later, the headquarters building stood ominously under the bright lights of the city. Mark arrived, his car skidding to a stop in front of the main entrance. His security team was already there, waiting for him. The team was made up of a diverse group. Some were elite hackers, others were cybersecurity experts, and a few were former military personnel. Together, they represented a formidable force. As Mark stepped out of the car, he glanced at the building in front of him. His fingers clenched into fists as he realized how far the hackers had gone. They had breached the very core of his company, and it was time to take it back. He took a deep breath and walked inside, the weight of the moment pressing on him. The tension in the air was thick, and the employees still inside the building wore expressions of fear and confusion. No one knew what was happening, and no one knew what would happen next. Mark moved quickly through the hallways, heading straight to the war room, the nerve center of Facebook's defense system. Inside, his top cybersecurity experts were already hard at work. The room was filled with multiple monitors, each showing live data from different systems across the company. The hum of machines and the rapid clatter of keyboards filled the air as his team worked to regain control. As Mark entered the room, all eyes turned to him. He nodded, acknowledging their efforts. "Status update," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "We've isolated the source of the breach." Sam, the head of security, said, her face tense with concentration. "It's coming from a remote location, but we haven't been able to pinpoint the exact address yet. They're using proxy servers to mask their location, making it almost impossible to trace." Mark's eyes narrowed. "How long do we have before they do real damage?" Sam hesitated, glancing at the other members of the team. "If we don't act fast, they could wipe all the data. They've already shut down several of our backups, and we're running out of time." Mark felt his stomach tighten. Wipe all the data. The thought of losing everything, the years of hard work, the millions of users, the influence, was unbearable. He couldn't let it happen. "Not now. We need a plan. A real plan," Mark said, his voice firm. "I want to hit them where it hurts. We can't just sit here and wait. It's time to strike back." Sam nodded. "We have a few options, but we need to act fast. If we can take control of their server and shut them down before they can escalate, we might have a chance." Mark turned to his team. "Get me everything you've got on their encryption methods. We're going to outsmart them. Find their weak spots, and don't stop until we've got them." The room buzzed with activity as Mark's team dove into action. He stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching as they worked. He could feel the pressure mounting, but he wasn't about to back down. This was a fight for the future. As the minutes ticked by, Mark felt his adrenaline kick in. There was no time for hesitation. They had to act now, before the hackers could unleash the full scope of their attack. Suddenly, a voice called out from one of the monitors. "I've got something." Mark rushed over to the screen. "What is it?" "It's a pattern," the analyst said, pointing to the screen. "The hackers are communicating through a series of encrypted messages. If we decode this, we can pinpoint their location." Mark leaned in, focusing on the screen. This was the breakthrough they needed. He could feel the shift in momentum. The hackers had thought they could outsmart him, but now, he was the one in control. "Let's get to work," Mark said. "Time to take them down." With his team working at full capacity, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew this battle wasn't over yet, but for the first time since the attack began, he felt like they had a chance. It wasn't just about fixing the system. It was about sending a message to the world. Mark had built Facebook from the ground up, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it down without a fight. He had faced countless challenges in the past, but this one was different. This was his company, his legacy, and he would do whatever it took to protect it. As the team worked tirelessly to decode the encrypted messages, Mark could only watch and wait, knowing that the next step would be the most crucial. The hackers had made one mistake. They had underestimated him. This was only the beginning. The clock was ticking. The tension in the war room was palpable, a heavy weight that seemed to press down on everyone, making it hard to breathe. The team worked in frenzied silence, their eyes glued to the screens, fingers flying over keyboards at an almost superhuman speed. The hackers' grip on Facebook had been tightening by the minute, and Mark knew they were running out of time. He paced back and forth, trying to control the panic that had begun to creep into his chest. He had always prided himself on being cool under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't just another corporate challenge or a rival trying to outmaneuver him. This was a full-scale attack on everything he had built, everything he had worked for. The attack had started with small breaches, harmless at first, but now, they were on the verge of destroying Facebook's infrastructure, user data, financial records, everything that made the platform function. And they had no idea who these hackers were or what their endgame was. Mark glanced at the screen showing the encrypted messages from the hackers. They were using an elaborate system, one that made it almost impossible to trace them. Every time his team thought they had a lead, it turned out to be another dead end. But Mark was relentless. He refused to let these criminals destroy what he had spent years creating. "Any updates?" Mark asked, his voice tight but steady. Sam, the head of security, glanced up from her screen. We're getting closer. We've managed to decrypt part of the message, but it's taking longer than we expected. Mark's eyes narrowed. How much longer? We don't know. It's complicated. They're using multiple layers of encryption, and each one is designed to throw us off the trail. Mark's mind raced. He needed a breakthrough, something that would change the game. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. He leaned over Sam's shoulder, studying the screen closely. The numbers and letters danced in front of him, like a maddening puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Suddenly, something clicked. A small detail, a pattern that didn't belong. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he zeroed in on it. "Wait a minute," he muttered, pointing at the screen. "There's something here." Sam looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Look at the way this string of characters repeats. It's not random. It's structured. They're using a code. A familiar one." Sam furrowed her brow. "Are you saying you recognize it?" Mark nodded, his mind racing. "Yes. This is a variation of an old encryption method. It's a flaw in their system. They think they've masked it, but they haven't. We can use this." Without wasting another second, Mark sprang into action. He called over the lead hacker, Ethan, who had been working quietly in the corner. Ethan was known for his sharp intellect and no-nonsense attitude. Mark had worked with him on several high-profile projects, and he trusted him implicitly. "Ethan, I need you to run this through the system. Fast," Mark said, pointing to the code on the screen. Ethan didn't hesitate. He jumped to his station, fingers flying over the keyboard. As he worked, Mark could see the look of concentration on his face. Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. He was completely absorbed in the task. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The silence in the room broken only by the sound of clicking keys and the occasional murmur of someone seeking clarification. Mark stood in the center of the room, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. His heart pounded in his chest, and yet, he couldn't let himself panic. This was it, the turning point. Suddenly, Ethan looked up. "Got it." Mark's pulse quickened. "What do you mean, got it?" "I mean we've cracked it," Ethan replied, his voice full of relief. "The encryption has a vulnerability, just like you said. It's not perfect, but we can use it." Mark's eyes widened. "How soon can you track them?" "We're already tracing it. It's going to take a few minutes to pinpoint their location, but we're on the right track now." Mark felt the adrenaline rush through him. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They weren't just defending against the hackers anymore. They were about to take the fight to them. "You heard him, team," Mark said, his voice suddenly booming with authority. "We're going after them. Now." Within moments, the room was alive with activity. Everyone was working faster, fueled by the knowledge that they had finally gained the upper hand. Mark couldn't help but smile. He had always believed that technology was the key to winning battles. And now, he was about to prove it. As the minutes ticked by, Mark watched intently as Ethan's screen filled with data. It was like watching the hackers' hideout slowly come into focus. Piece by piece, they were closing in on the source. Finally, Ethan looked up, his face breaking into a grin. "We've got a location. They're operating out of a warehouse in the outskirts of the city." Mark's grin mirrored Ethan's. "Good. Now, let's take them down." He turned to Sam. "Get the team ready. We're going in." Sam's eyes widened. "Mark, you're not seriously thinking about going there yourself, are you?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, his mind racing. He had always been a hands-on leader, but this felt different. This wasn't just about protecting Facebook anymore. It was personal. These hackers had attacked his company, his legacy, and Mark was ready to do whatever it took to stop them. "I'm going," he said simply. "Prepare the team. I'll be there in 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, the warehouse was located in a dimly lit industrial park, far from the city center. Mark's heart raced as he pulled up in the sleek black SUV, the headlights illuminating the dark, deserted parking lot. This was the final stage. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he wasn't about to back down now. His security team was already waiting for him, each member fully equipped and ready for whatever lay ahead. They were armed. But this wasn't just about brute force. It was about catching the hackers off guard. Mark glanced at the building, his mind sharp and focused. This is it. Let's move. They approached the warehouse carefully, moving in sync as they surveyed the area. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. Mark's instincts told him that something wasn't right, but he couldn't afford to hesitate now. He pushed forward, signaling for his team to follow. They reached the door and quickly breached it, Mark leading the charge. The inside was dark, filled with the hum of machinery and the faint sound of distant voices. It smelled like dust and old metal. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what to expect, but he was ready for anything. Suddenly, a shout echoed through the darkness. "Who's there?" Mark's team froze, weapons at the ready. "It's over," Mark called out, his voice firm. "We know what you've been doing. Come out now, and this can all end peacefully." There was a long silence, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in all black. His face was partially obscured by a mask, but Mark could tell by the way he carried himself that this wasn't just any hacker. It was their leader. Well, the man said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mark Zuckerberg himself. You're a lot more persistent than I gave you credit for." Mark stepped forward, locking eyes with the man. "This ends now." The hacker smirked. "You think you've won? You've only scratched the surface. Zuckerberg, you have no idea what's really at stake." Mark's jaw clenched, but he refused to back down. "You're done." With that, his team moved in, and the hacker was quickly apprehended. The battle was over, but Mark knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The air inside the warehouse felt charged with electricity. Mark could feel the tension tightening around him as the hacker, still standing with his hands behind his head, clearly unafraid, stared back at him with a wicked grin. "You think you've won? Huh?" The hacker sneered. "This is just the beginning. You have no idea who you're messing with." Mark's pulse quickened. He couldn't afford to lose focus now. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the last piece of the battle that had consumed his every waking hour. The hacker's defiance only made Mark more determined to finish what they had started. "Who are you really?" Mark asked, his voice cutting through the tension. He wasn't just angry now. He was determined. "Who's behind this?" The hacker tilted his head, the mocking grin never leaving his face. "You'll find out soon enough. You're not as smart as you think you are." "Zuckerberg." Mark stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the hackers. "You've made a huge mistake, messing with Facebook. But it's not just Facebook you've targeted. You've targeted everything I stand for, everything my team and I have built. And I won't let that slide." The hacker chuckled, his voice low and dark. "Oh, you're a brave one, but your arrogance will be your downfall. Do you really think you can stop what's coming?" For a moment, the silence between them was deafening. The atmosphere in the warehouse was thick with the scent of impending confrontation. Mark's mind raced, trying to anticipate the hacker's next move. But he knew one thing for certain. This had gone beyond just a cyber attack. This was personal, and it was time for it to end. "Enough talking," Mark snapped, his voice hardening. "We're ending this now." Suddenly, the hacker's grin faded, and he motioned to his team, 4 other masked figures who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the moment to strike. They stepped forward, revealing themselves, each one armed and ready. Mark's team reacted immediately, positioning themselves between Mark and the threat. A standoff had begun. "I didn't come here to fight," Mark said, raising his hands slightly to signal his team to hold back. "I came here to shut you down." The hacker, unfazed by Mark's words, laughed bitterly. "Shut me down? You think you have the power to stop me? You're too late. Zuckerberg, the damage has already been done." Just then, one of the hacker's accomplices lunged forward, pulling out a gun from under his jacket. Mark instinctively took a step back, his heart racing. He had expected this to escalate, but not this quickly. "You really think you can intimidate me with that?" Mark asked, his voice calm, almost too calm. He had faced much worse in the business world. "After all, don't test us, Mark," the hacker said, stepping closer. "We're going to destroy everything you've built, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." The tension in the air was palpable. Mark could feel his pulse thundering in his ears. But he didn't flinch. He had trained himself for moments like this, moments when the stakes were life and death, moments when fear was nothing but a distraction. He took a deep breath and steadied his nerves. "Sam, Ethan," Mark said, his voice low but firm. "Take them down." Without warning, Sam and Ethan sprang into action. The hackers' team reacted in kind, drawing their weapons and moving to attack. But Mark's team was faster, more coordinated. In a blur of motion, they closed the gap, disarming one of the attackers and forcing another into a submission hold. The remaining two went down with a swift strike to their legs, leaving them incapacitated but alive. Mark watched as his team moved like a well-oiled machine. His heart swelled with pride. This was what they had trained for, the moment when they would face real danger and come out on top. The hacker, who had been watching the fight unfold, didn't seem concerned at all. In fact, he appeared to be smirking. "You think this is the end?" the hacker taunted, his eyes narrowing as he took a step back, surveying the situation. "You've only beaten the small fish. You're not even close to finding out who's really behind this." Mark's eyes narrowed as well. There was something in the hacker's voice that sent a chill down his spine. "Who are you working for?" But the hacker just shook his head, laughing bitterly. "It's not who I'm working for. It's who you'll be working for once this is over." Mark's jaw clenched. What does that mean? Who's pulling the strings? Before the hacker could respond, there was a sudden noise, a loud crash coming from the back of the warehouse. Mark's head snapped around just as the sound of footsteps echoed through the darkened space. From the shadows emerged another figure, a tall man in a long black coat, his face obscured by a hood. This new arrival had an air of authority that immediately caught Mark's attention. His movements were deliberate, calculated, dangerous. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He could feel it in his gut. This was the one who had been behind everything, the one who had masterminded the entire attack. "You must be the one pulling the strings," Mark said, his voice icy. "You're the one behind all of this." The man in the coat smiled, the smile cold and menacing. "So, you figured it out, Zuckerberg. It's about time." Mark stepped forward, his fists clenching at his sides. "Who the hell are you?" The man raised his head, revealing his face. Mark's eyes widened in recognition. It was someone from his past, someone he thought he'd left behind. "You," Mark whispered. "I should have known." The man's smile widened as he took a step closer. "You always were the smartest one, Mark. But you never saw this coming, did you? All these years, you've been playing the game, thinking you were winning. But the truth is, I've been pulling the strings all along." Mark's mind raced. This was the moment he had feared, the moment when everything he had worked for came crashing down. The man before him wasn't just a hacker. He wasn't just some shadowy figure behind the scenes. No, this was someone who had been inside his world, someone who had once been close to him. It was his former mentor, the man who had taught him everything he knew about technology, about power, about control. The man who had turned his back on him years ago when they had disagreed about the future of Facebook. And now, he was back, not as an ally, but as an enemy. "You're not going to win this," Mark said, his voice hardening. "I'll stop you, no matter what it takes." The former mentor chuckled darkly. "You can try, Mark, but you're already too late." In that moment, Mark realized that this wasn't just a battle for Facebook's future. It was a battle for his own soul. And no matter how this ended, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going down without a fight. The air in the warehouse felt dense, charged with a mix of adrenaline and disbelief. Mark stood frozen, staring at the man who had once been a mentor, the man he had trusted more than anyone else in his rise to the top of the tech world. Now, this same man, standing before him, was the mastermind behind the chaos that had nearly destroyed everything Mark had built. His former mentor, Richard, smiled with a knowing, almost sadistic gleam in his eyes. "You've done well, Mark," Richard said, his voice calm, measured. "But you're too late. It's already over." Mark felt a surge of anger, frustration, and confusion. This was supposed to be the end of the nightmare. He had tracked the hacker, exposed the conspiracies, and finally come face to face with the person who had caused so much damage. And yet, it felt like he was no closer to ending it all. "What do you mean it's over?" Mark asked, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You've lost. You've been caught. This ends tonight." Richard laughed, a low chuckle that sent chills down Mark's spine. "Caught? No. Mark, you've only just scratched the surface. You think you can stop me with your little team of code geeks and a handful of security guards? You're nothing compared to what I've built." Mark's fists clenched. His mind raced. He wasn't going to let Richard destroy everything he had worked for, everything he had built. "You're wrong. I'll stop you, no matter what it takes." Richard stepped closer, his expression darkening. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about Facebook or technology. This is about control, power. The world is changing, Mark, and you've been too naive to see it." The weight of Richard's words hit Mark like a ton of bricks. The world was changing. Technology was evolving at a pace no one could have predicted. But what Richard was suggesting wasn't just about control over Facebook or even social media. It was about reshaping the entire digital landscape, manipulating it in ways that could have far-reaching consequences. "You think you can control the world with this scheme?" Mark asked, his voice low and dangerous. "You think you can just pull the strings behind the scenes and everyone will fall in line?" Richard's eyes sparkled with a sinister gleam. "I already have, Mark. I've planted the seeds of doubt, of distrust. I've manipulated the system, corrupted the very thing you built. The users, the investors, the media, they're all in my hands now. You can't win." Mark's stomach churned. He had never realized just how deep Richard's obsession with control went. It wasn't just about defeating him, about taking over Facebook. It was about something much darker, something far more insidious. Richard wasn't trying to build something. He was trying to destroy it all. But Mark couldn't allow that to happen. Not now. Not after everything he had sacrificed. He had built Facebook to connect people, to bring the world closer together. He had done it for the right reasons. And he wasn't going to let someone like Richard tear it down. "You're wrong," Mark said firmly, stepping closer to Richard. "I may have made mistakes. I've lost my way before. But I've learned. People are smarter than you think. You can't control them forever." Richard narrowed his eyes. "You're deluded, Mark. The world doesn't work the way you think it does. And now, it's too late. I've already won." Just then, the silence was broken by a loud crash. Mark's team, who had been silently observing the confrontation, had managed to subdue the hacker's crew. But there was no time to celebrate. The real battle was just beginning. Mark's heart raced. It was clear now that Richard wasn't going to back down. He was playing a different game, one with stakes higher than Mark had ever imagined. Richard's phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out quickly. His face shifted as he read the message. Mark saw the color drain from his face. "What's wrong?" Mark demanded, his voice sharp. "Is it over? Are you finally admitting defeat?" Richard didn't answer at first. He stared at the screen, his mind seemingly racing. Finally, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "No," he said, his voice hollow. "I just got a message from my team. There's been a breach." Mark's pulse quickened. "A breach? What do you mean?" Richard's face twisted in frustration, his hands trembling as he typed rapidly on his phone. "There's a backdoor in the system. It wasn't supposed to happen. They know. This can't be real." Mark stepped forward, not sure if he should feel relief or dread. "What backdoor? What are you talking about?" Before Richard could answer, the lights in the warehouse flickered, and an alarm blared to life. Mark's heart skipped a beat. The sudden chaos was disorienting, but Mark's focus didn't waver. He knew what he had to do. "We need to leave. Now," Mark shouted to his team. "Get the data. Shut down the servers before it's too late." As his team scrambled into action, Mark turned back to Richard, whose face was now ashen. "You've lost, Richard," Mark said. "You never had control." "Not really." Richard dropped his phone in disbelief, staring at Mark with a mixture of anger and fear. "This isn't over. Zuckerberg, you have no idea what you've just unleashed." But Mark wasn't listening. He had already made up his mind. The hackers' team had been dismantled, and now, with the backdoor exposed, the system was vulnerable. They had won. But the battle wasn't just about winning. It was about preserving everything they had worked for, protecting the people they cared about, and ensuring the future of the platform they had built. The story of Mark's battle against the hacker and his former mentor, Richard, is a reminder of the complexities of power, trust, and resilience. Mark's journey wasn't just about defeating the enemy. It was about learning from his mistakes, adapting, and ultimately using his strengths to turn the tide. In life, we all face challenges that seem insurmountable, moments when everything we've worked for is on the line. But the key is never giving up, no matter how dire the circumstances. Mark's success wasn't just about his intellect or his resources. It was about his determination to protect what mattered most. We all have a choice: to be defined by the obstacles we face or to rise above them, learning, growing, and moving forward. Mark's story shows that no matter how powerful or unstoppable the forces against us may seem, we can always take action to protect what's truly important. Now, it's your turn. What lesson have you learned from Mark's journey? How do you deal with challenges in your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more exciting stories and life lessons. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even more content that matters. Remember, the fight may be tough, but as long as you're in the game, you're never truly defeated.